Cascardi. I'm a senior literary agent with Transatlantic Agency. I've been a literary agent twice. I was an editor for 20 years, and then I became a literary agent for about 10 years, and then I was offered an opportunity. I've been a literary agent twice. I was an editor for 20 years, and then I became a literary agent for about 10 years, and then I was offered an opportunity. I've been a literary agent twice. For some reason, this is playing back to me what I'm saying, so I don't know if that's a glitch with the system or with my computer, but I will minimize my conversation.
I think it's working now. Hangouts is acting up today.
Okay, well, I was an editor for 20 years, then I became an agent, then I was offered the opportunity to lead Egmont USA for a few years. Unfortunately, it was sold, but I was very lucky. Transatlantic said if I ever wanted to come back to being an agent, they would welcome me back, and I took the opportunity, and now I'm very happy being back where I where I loved being an agent before.
Awesome. And guys, I'm Amy. I'm one of the Right on Con moderators, and I'm going to be reading, Andrea, your questions today. So if it's okay, we'll just dive right in. The first question is actually from someone also named Andrea.
Oh, I always love meeting other Andreas. We're few and far between.
Yeah. She says, I am a self-published author with 14 books, including 3 bestsellers. Would a traditional publisher be willing to accept a query?
Oh, I think that if publishers are accepting queries from unagented authors, you should absolutely try to see what headway you can make. I think it depends on the genre you're writing and what your bestseller status is. But yes, I think publishers are definitely interested in people who can make themselves successful. Especially if it can translate into how they will work with the publisher to make any books that the publisher would publish successful.
Awesome. The next question is from someone called Debbie, and she says, where is the line between historical and contemporary fiction? What year does history start in from this perspective?
Well, that's an interesting question depending on who you're writing for. I do a lot of children's books, and anything that happens before a kid is born is historical to them. Having said that, if the nature of the story, it depends upon it taking place in a certain era where, the events of the day figure into the story, or there's some aspect of the book that's dependent on it happening, around a historic event or before a historic event or before and after a historic event. Like, for example, if a book takes place before 9/11 for reasons, or before and after 9/11, if the aftermath of a historic event figures into the story, even though it doesn't seem that long ago to us, it would certainly be historical fiction because you're using history in the book in a way that becomes an important catalyst for the story. And as I said, for children, anything that happened before they were born, or perhaps even before they are a few years old, is historical fiction to them. I deal with a lot of manuscripts that come in that are set in an indeterminate recent past that have no reason to be historic, except, for example, perhaps the author doesn't want the characters to have the use of cell phones. And I sort of feel like that's a little bit cheating, because if that's just a glitch of not wanting to deal with something in current events, then setting it in the past just feels a little bit pointless to me. But if it's important that your book be set in an era, in a year, even if it's 20 years ago because of something that happened in that year that was important to the story, then it's historical fiction. That's the way I look at it. But there's no rule book. That's just my opinion.
Right. Awesome. We have a question from someone named Dave. He says, I have a story with 2 equal and opposite main characters. It was suggested by a critiquer that I focus on only one in the query, but then I feel like half the story is missing. Currently, my first paragraph introduces the first main character, and the second paragraph introduces the second, the same order as in the book. Although I like the way it reads, I know it's very odd. Do you have any suggestions for the query of a 2 or multi-character story when one isn't really dominant? Thank you.
Absolutely. As an agent, I often have to sell books with more than one main character, and it's really your job to figure out how to let the reader of your query, the agent or the publisher, know immediately that this is a book with multiple points of view and multiple narrators. So you do have to work that in. Don't just talk about one character and then go to the next one. You have to figure out how to put that into one of your first sentences, even if you say this is a story told in 2 points of view. The first is so-and-so, the second is so-and-so, and then talk about the first one in more depth than the second one. But you do have to work that in very quickly. I mean, I represent books that have many characters, and you have to let the reader know immediately that that's what kind of book it is.
Okay, makes sense. Next question is from Heather. She says, I have a book proposal for a nonfiction book about endangered Disney characters. Agents I've pitched it to were concerned Disney was likely to accept it. I've been told they do most of the work in-house. Can you comment on Disney accepting nonfiction book proposals from agents? And do you have any suggestions for how to get this kind of book published?
That's really specific. I don't have any inside knowledge of how Disney would perceive such a proposal. But if it depends on you having access to Disney properties and Disney licensed art to create the book, and you're expecting them to provide that for you, then obviously they are the place you have to start. But they don't accept, I think, again, please, I'm not speaking with any authority here except my, understanding of common knowledge, that they don't accept unagented proposals. But I think you'd have to find a way to, maybe one of their editors is at a conference that you could ask them, if you can see where their editors are speaking, if they're doing any SCBWIs, or if this is an adult book. Well, actually, they don't do adult books. Then, maybe if you can get to one of them in a venue where you could ask that question, that would be more helpful, because I don't actually have any knowledge of how they would deal with something like that. Sorry. That's really a question that would have to be answered by somebody who works there.
Okay. All right. Next question is from Karen. She says, I read on your manuscript wish list page that one of your favorite subgenres is historical fantasy. Are there any specific time periods that interest you?
Yes, I'm very interested in World War II and the 20th century, early 20th century. Sorry, I'm getting my centuries mixed up. The early 20th century in general.
Okay, awesome. Carolyn asks, submission process question. What % of agented YA and MG manuscripts end up with book contracts? Ooh, tough question. Do the numbers vary between genres? And can you provide an average typical time to expect a manuscript to be on submission?
That's 3 very different questions. Can you say the first one again?
What % of agented YA and MG manuscripts end up with book contracts?
I don't know. I think somebody recently did a pie chart about that. I have no information personally as to those statistics, but try Harold Underdown, who has a great website. He often has interesting statistics like that, and maybe he knows more than I do because he surveys the industry in general. I couldn't say. Or maybe the SCBWI knows. I don't know. That's for children's books. And then what was the second part of that question?
Do the numbers vary between genres?
I think it depends on the what publishers are looking for each year. Certain years YA is hotter than middle grade. Certain years middle grade is hotter than YA. It depends on what they already have under contract. If an editor or a list has a lot of YA signed up, then they're going to be looking for more middle grade. So that's going to float depending on from imprint to imprint and publisher to publisher. I don't think there's any way to assess that. There's certainly anecdotal evidence based on if you read after the Bologna Book Fair, for example, or before, after the London Book Fair or the Frankfurt Book Fair, you can read in the trade newspapers or the trade magazines like Publishers Weekly that a lot of deals were done either prior to the fair or after the fair worldwide, and more people did YA contracts than middle grade or vice versa. You can also go to Publishers Marketplace and look up and see how many deals were done in that. I think Publishers Marketplace actually does keep account of how many deals per category are done because they list their deals by category. So that would be a good place to find that information.
Absolutely. The third part of her question was, can you provide an average or typical wait time to expect a manuscript to be on submission?
From an agent to a publisher, do you think she means?
That's what I think she means, yeah.
Oh, I wish there was. Really, honestly, there is no typical. There is absolutely no typical. It could go from, somebody could turn it around in a day and say yes or no, and somebody could take 8 months to a year to say, oh, I finally got to reading this and I don't want it, or I realize I should have snapped this up sooner. There was no typical. Agents would love it if there was typical.
That would be nice. She also asked, how often do editors request revise and resubmits? Probably again.
Not that often. I think unless they're serious about something, they don't do that. It would have to be something. They often will say, make comments about something, but they don't often request a revise and resubmit. I think if they really wanted it, they take it. And if they feel it needs work and it's just not for them, then they'd rather let it go to an editor who perhaps can champion it, to a greater extent. So they don't spend a lot of time doing revise and resubmit. So it's usually special when you get one.
Okay. Awesome. Joni asks, are you only open to nonfiction picture books? And for a nonfiction picture book, do you want to see the whole manuscript or just a proposal initially?
I'm trying to remember what my current manuscript wish list is. I think I did say that right now I'm only open to nonfiction picture books. I'm not looking for science and STEM right now because I do have a lot of that. I'm looking for more social science, biography, things that are thoughtful and other topics of and things that maybe I haven't even thought about. Historical topics. And yes, I think no, for picture books I still want a query. I don't want to see the whole manuscript.
Okay, awesome. Katie asks a two-part question. I'll just read the first part, so it's not too long. She asks, is the category graphic novel for young readers a recognized option today? She said, yeah, she means something. It is not a picture book with graphic elements and not a YA graphic novel. And
very much. Picture books, obviously, by definition, are fully illustrated, so they are, in essence, a graphic, representation. It's the text and the art are equal. It's as you get older where the text normally is a greater percentage of the book, and the illustrations start to be reduced, or they're not even present in the older fiction, where the graphic novel is now coming in as a very strong category for older readers, middle grade, and up through young adult, up through adult.
Okay. And then she asks, who would you query for such a project? And would the manuscript format, follow comics/script formatting? Ooh.
Yes, it follows script formatting, and you would query any agent who is looking for graphic novels. I mean, I'm not sure if I understand what that question is. Obviously, just like any other part of the business, you have to do your research and see which agents are interested in middle grade graphic novels. And yes, you send usually a synopsis and a chapter worked out, and then a script, like it would be a like a film script, but it's a graphic novel script.
Okay. The next question is from Kirk. He says, I'm hearing that breaking into the middle grade market is extremely competitive. Is there any hope for a first-time novelist? And what do you think is required to gain entry into this market?
Well, I actually think that it's always difficult to get into book publishing because there are so many people writing. So your book has to be the best book you can write. Middle grade isn't necessarily harder than any other category. In fact, it might be a little bit less difficult because it's the, sort of maybe the bulk of children's readers are, middle grade. And right now there has been recently a lot of emphasis on publishers acquiring middle grade, but you have to write the best you can. You have to make create characters that were unforgettable. You have to put them in situations that are unique and compelling and fresh, and do the best job you can. And yes, publishers acquire debut writers all the time. If you go to Publishers Marketplace, you can see the number of debut authors that are acquired, whose books are acquired.
Absolutely. The next question is from Talon. Oh, I might have mispronounced that. Talon or Talon. How long is too long to take to send requested material to an agent? She says that she was wondering about a request over a year ago. You'd requested a full manuscript from a query contest, but the request came about 6 months after the entry. It went to my spam, and I recently found it. Should I go ahead and send it?
Oh, I think in a case like that, where where it was a rational reason why you didn't send it, It's perfectly fine. But yeah, I think you do need to acknowledge a refreshment of what was requested and when and why. Because sometimes I'll get requests from things or I'll get submissions from things where it's as if the person and I spoke yesterday and it was really a year ago and I've forgotten, and it's cleared out of my, to be followed up on or what have you. So just, I mean, we get so many queries and manuscripts daily that just, pick it up. Don't pick it up as if the agent knows exactly what you're talking about. Just refresh them.
Okay, that makes sense. Next question is from Cindy. Oh, goodness. Do you know the next big topic or genre for YA?
I wish.
Yeah.
I don't. You know what? The next big book will create the next big topic or genre. And sometimes it's not even a book that necessarily was sold big. It could be a book that gains traction in-house after it's acquired, and people start reading it and getting really excited about it. And if I had a crystal ball, there would be no errors, and this is not an error-free business. So unfortunately, I don't.
Okay. Question for you. What advice would you give to someone hoping to become an agent?
Well, I would say read everything in the area that you want to represent so you know what's being published, and figure out how to, if you can get an internship if you're a young person and you're in college or you're trying to change careers. There are a lot of agents that have internships available for people. There's a never-ending need for readers at literary agencies, and many of the agencies employ or have interns who either are virtual or come in, to an office to work. And I would go on bookjobs.com because a lot of those internships are posted regularly, sort of an ongoing basis. So those are that's kind of the key, I think, to getting in.
Awesome. Sorry, that was my dog was sneezing. Question for you. What is the most satisfying aspect of your job, and what are the most frustrating or challenging parts?
Oh, goodness. The most satisfying is, I think, not just selling a book, but when a publisher really is excited about the book and you can see it gaining traction in-house. So, the sale, of course, is extremely exciting, and that's very satisfying. But it's also just as satisfying when it's starting to be published and people are, it's garnering a lot of attention. And I think also working directly with authors on helping them build their careers is extremely satisfying. I think frustrating is, just it's just like anything, it's a business like any business, and there are days that things just don't seem to happen. People don't get back to you, or, you make you're trying to work out the details of a contract and you feel, maybe it's with a publisher you've dealt with before and it's as if you're starting over again. Just any of the little daily administrative things that take you away from making submissions. It's not that it's frustrating. It's just part of the job, and people often forget that we're doing a lot of administrative work in the background.
Okay, awesome. And then Katie, who had asked an earlier question, had just for clarification. Mm-hmm. She had asked about the graphic novel for young readers, and she was asking not about picture books, middle grade, or YA, but specifically about books that would be engaging to the chapter book crowd. And she's asking if that kind of genre exists in today's market at any level.
I think so. I mean, I don't see why it wouldn't. Depends on how young you're talking. If you're talking about beginning readers, then no, because again, those books are usually fully illustrated already. So if you're talking about something that would normally have maybe spot art and instead having it with more illustrations, sure. I mean, I think, what's his name? There's a HarperCollins author who's done a lot now. He's going to be published by Crown. I can't think of his name right now, but I mean, think about isn't Dork Diary sort of like that? Or, I mean, when you're saying graphic novels, do you mean specifically comic looking, like, with comic panels?
Or find the question.
Does it mean a lot of illustrations? Because that term graphic novel for chapter books does kind of get a little muddy in terms of it, if you're saying specifically comic panels versus illustrations throughout. People often use the term graphic novel, even if it's not designed to look like a comic book.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Lincoln Pierce. That's who I'm thinking of.
Who was it? I'm sorry. I think I spoke over.
Lincoln Pierce. I think of his books as being sort of graphic novel-y.
Okay. All right. Because, yeah, she mentioned she was just wondering if there's any specific publishing houses known for acquiring that specific type.
I think it's more editor and imprint. But again, go look at the market. Do the research at a bookstore, at a Barnes and Noble, at a library. See, look at the spine, look at the title page. I mean, the copyright page. And then go on Publishers Marketplace. I mean, it's such a wealth of information there. You can slice and dice that information any way you want.
Okay, perfect. So perhaps she, find the books that she's liking and talking about and kind of go from there.
Yeah, and if she's not seeing them, always ask yourself, is there a reason? I mean, you can always ask a bookseller. Say, I don't see any graphic novels for chapter book readers here. Do you think that that's something that would be welcome in the bookstore? Would there be a reason to have it? And they might say, we've never seen any from a publisher, or the ones we carried never sold, so we stopped carrying them. There's a lot of nuances about why some things aren't done. Sometimes it's because it hasn't been successful in the past, and that makes publishers reluctant to try it in the future.
Okay, all right. Well, sounds like a great idea. What are some of this kind of touches on this, what are some of the best resources for querying writers that you've come across?
For writers, I would absolutely say, Twitter, things like this, pitch contests, workshops like this. If it's to learn how to query, I think there's a ton of things online that you can just access. If it's for where to pitch, then again, I think you have to go to something like Publishers Marketplace or Publishers Weekly, which lists all of the deals every week that are that are sent in, and see who's acquiring.
Okay. In your experience, are there seasons or certain times of year when editors are more likely to acquire books?
No, not really. I think just like anything, their day and their weeks vary from house to house. It depends, if they're busy at sales conference or they're personally on vacation, it could affect what they're acquiring. Often people say, it's tough to get things acquired in December, but then there are other people who are trying to acquire before the end of the year. So there isn't any hard and fast rule that I've come across.
Okay. Let's see. How many agents should a writer query with a particular piece of work before shelving it and moving on?
I think as many as you feel you have the stamina for. Especially depends on what. Here's my answer to that. Query the agents who are really looking for what you're trying to sell. It's one thing to say query 100 agents, but if out of those 100 agents you haven't really researched to see that they're all interested in what you're writing, then you might as well not query 100. Better to query 25 who are specifically interested in what you're interested in. Because it's just a waste of time to send things to a bunch of agents if they're not really, open, or they're not really, if they're saying, I'm not interested in YA, and you're like, well, I think this is not really YA, but it really is YA. Just make the most out of your queries. Make sure you really target them well. And then if you feel that you're not getting anywhere, if you're really not getting like any response, maybe it's not the book, maybe it's the query that needs work. Because if you're not presenting your book professionally, I'm just giving a lot of reasons why I maybe don't respond to a query. That's what I'm estimating. So, for example, I don't represent high fantasy, but I get a ton of fantasy queries, and sometimes I have the energy to write back and say I don't represent this genre, and sometimes I just have to delete it because it does say on my web page that I can't really respond to things that are out of my genre. So you have to figure out, first of all, if you're getting nothing back, that whether or not it's the query or whether it's who you're targeting, because it'd be rare that you wouldn't get anything back from something that sounds interesting. But if you're getting people to say, I'd love to read it, and then not responding, then it's probably the manuscript that isn't working. Okay. And those are two different things.
Okay. Kind of touching on that, what are some common mistakes that you see in queries in your inbox?
I would say the most common mistake is that I'm being queried on something that I don't represent, and have no interest in representing, and have even said, please don't send me. So that's definitely the most common mistake. And that just says to me that somebody found my name and, decided to send it to me, even though, and sometimes they'll even say, I saw on your website that you're interested in such. And I'm like, no, you definitely did not see that. So that's just sort of like smacks of a stock query letter, no matter who the person is on the other end. So that to me is my biggest, is the biggest reason that I don't respond to somebody. I think other than that, it just depends on the query itself has to just be really compelling, has to feel like I get a sense of the writer's writing style. A great query letter gives me a sense that when I open the book, I'm also going to be excited about the writing in the book. So if the query is written in a certain style, I'm hoping the book that I enjoy, then I'm hoping the book will feel the same way. So maybe it's easier to talk about it that way, what does get me excited. I think sometimes also, sometimes I get query letters that are so overwhelmingly blowing the writer's horn. This is going to be the best thing you've ever read in your life. You've never read a manuscript like mine, and it's gonna, you're gonna want to sign it up immediately. It's those overselling queries without substance behind it are a big turnoff to me.
Okay. Kind of along the same vein, how important is social media or blogging statistics to an agent, and should that be in a query letter?
I don't think it should be in a query letter. I mean, unless it's important to your subject. if you're writing a book about yoga, and you are on Instagram and you're a yoga practitioner with 100,000 Instagram followers, yeah, put it in. But if you've written a middle grade novel and you are, you've been writing for 10 years and you have a master's in an MFA, or you've won any contests, you've got short stories published, those kind of credentials are more important to me than social media, because it shows me that you've worked on your craft. And social media is not craft. You can have great social media stats and not be a great writer, and you can be a great writer and not have social media stats. But if it relates to your book in any way, then you should include it.
Makes sense. Someone asked, is it okay to query 2 separate manuscripts at a time to different agents? Or is it better to query 1 at a time?
I think it's better to query. Very weird to be sending out 2 different manuscripts to different agents. What if one agent wants to sign you and then another agent wants to sign you? What would you do?
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. How many rounds of revisions do you typically do with your clients before they're submission ready?
There's no answer to that question, because it depends on, each book is totally different. Usually there's 1 round just to clean things up. I would say that's the baseline.
Okay, at least 1.
But other than that, it could go, could depend on what they do with that revision. If they go in a different direction, and if it works or if it doesn't work. But when I say revision, it could just be little things like, this paragraph in that chapter or the beginning, or, could be very minor depending on the client. There's no answer to that question, because again, there's no typical in this business. Every writer is different, and I work differently depending on who the writer is, what they need.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. Do you have any advice for your clients on how to deal with the stress and uncertainty of being on submission?
Meditation, yoga, alcohol. Really, I would say keep working on other things. Don't be, the submission process could go for a very long time, or it could be very hot, and things could happen very quickly. So, just keep on keeping on. I mean, the day to day, somebody's got it in their inbox. We don't know when they're going to read it. We don't know what they're going to say about it. We can't control it. And so sort of understanding the zen of that, which is, we have no control over what anybody else does. All we can do is do the best we can. You write the best book, I make a pitch that makes them want to read it. And then the book and the editor, hopefully magic will happen, but you just don't know. So you just have to say, okay, I'm going to go on about my business. If you sit there and think about it too much, it will become very stressful.
Makes sense.
But if you're feeling stressed, always tell your agent and communicate. That's the other thing.
Okay. So you're not bothered if your clients email saying they're stressed out about the process.
Well, because I'm here to listen.
Absolutely. Someone asks, are there any hot topics being included in publishing contracts these days that weren't as big a deal 10 or 15 years ago? For example, Netflix or Amazon Prime programming rights.
No, those have always been in contracts. That's film and television rights. I think the only thing that's a hot topic now is whether or not publishers are going to ask for morality clauses to ensure that authors are behaving themselves according to what publishers think is proper behavior, but which could be problematic if it's a globalization that gives the publisher the right to cancel an agreement and cite that clause for, sort of general reasons.
Oh, that's very interesting. Um, hmm. Someone asks, have you had any projects that got away? Things that you
yes,
nabbed.
of course. I don't want to dwell on them though, because hopefully they landed with the right agent and were successful. I mean, I think everybody in this business has had those, the one that got away. And, frankly, if they're published successfully, it makes you feel good about your taste and your, acumen. So it can be sad, but it can also be, yeah, I knew that was going to be big, or I knew that was going to win awards.
Yeah. Sounds good. I apologize. My dog barking in the background.
Okay, I have a dog. We might hear her soon too.
Someone asks, I think this is one of our last questions, unless people want to post some more. What projects are on the top of your wish list right now?
Oh boy. I'm really looking for magical realism in middle grade. I am looking for just special things that are where the writing is really elevated and is married to a really compelling plot. Sometimes I'll get things that are really commercial and the writing is, really compelling, but not necessarily with that literary edge to it. And I would love to see something that has an elevated literary edge to a really compelling plot in middle grade or young adult. And I'm looking for, I'm looking for things that are hopeful, but that aren't facile, funny to be funny. I love things that have a mix of humor and deep emotion at the same time. So whatever that means. And I'm certainly looking for own voices and diversity in my inbox. Again, whatever that means to people, different kinds of people, different kinds of creative voices coming to the industry. I'm interested in what people have to bring. But yeah, definitely, specifically, I would say more magical realism. I love magical realism, and I'm not sure everybody can really do that well. But those are some of my favorite. Those have been some of my favorite books over the years, whether I've edited them, agented them, or just read them.
Absolutely. Well, I have one more question, and then hopefully if anyone has any final questions they want to ask, type them up now so I can see them. Are there any pet peeves that make you stop reading a query straight away?
No, as I said, just if it's not in a genre I represent, really, that's my pet peeve. And also, if it doesn't feel professional. Remember, this is a business letter. I tried when I taught a class for several semesters at a university of children's book publishing, and we sort of started from the process as if the students were the writers, so they could understand where it all begins. It begins with the writer, and I had to impress upon them this is a business letter. It's like it's in a sense you're applying for a job. You want somebody to hire you, not really, because nobody's hiring. You're actually hiring the agent, but in the sense that the agent wants to see that you take your work seriously because this is the agent's work and it's serious. Just make sure you're absolutely professional. So when things feel sort of tossed off as if, anybody could, and also not respectful of children's books being a serious part of the business, so it feels dashed off and as if, gee, children's books, anybody could write those. I think I'll send mine in and it'll be, a bestseller tomorrow. That level of lack of respect for what we all do as a profession would be a big pet peeve for me.
Okay. Oh, and one more question. Taylin asks, what is magical realism compared to fantasy?
magical realism is grounded in the real world, and yet there's an element of magic about it that may not revolve around another world of fantasy. You know, it may not have. It comes out of things that are somewhat unexplained, but enter the world that the character inhabits. So for yeah, like for example, Savvy. You know, there's a magical element to that, but it's not a fantasy in the sense that everybody lives in a, you know, it's not high fantasy. Let's put it that way. It's a magical element in the real world.
Okay, absolutely. Do you have any other favorite magical realism books that you can recommend for someone wanting to learn about it?
Sure, but can I think of them right now?
I'll put you on the spot.
Man, I can't think right now. I'm sorry. I know Savvy is just an easy one to remember. I'm sorry, I'm drawing a blank.
I can think of off the top of my head, Bone Gap was magical realism, was it?
Yeah. Okay. There you go. Bone Gap.
Yeah, that was a
Bone
good.
Gap's a little bit older, a little bit more. Yeah, a little bit darker.
Absolutely. Okay. Well, I'm refreshing one more.
Fabulous book. Yes.
Yeah, so good. I'm refreshing one more time to see if anyone has any more questions, but I think that might be it. Do you have any other final advice for writers looking to query you, or just in general before we sign off?
Just pay attention to what, I mean, for me, I changed my website, my AndreaCascardi.com website, when I'm either going on submission, going off submission, or changing the genres that I'm looking for. So I think the other piece of this is sometimes there's information that's floating out there from a year ago or 2 years ago, and it's very hard to figure out how to get those sites to change what you said, because you said it 2 years ago doesn't mean you're necessarily looking for it now. So whether you're querying me or you're querying another agent, be very attuned to what they're saying on Twitter, or what they're saying on Manuscript Wishlist, or what they're saying on their own websites in the immediate time around your querying, because you may be stuck with old information, and it may not be blanket, I'm always going to be looking for X. It may have been a very specific, I'm looking for this now, and then they're not looking for it anymore. And it's, you know, as I said, that stuff kind of lives out there in the universe. It's not always easy to figure out where it was. I mean, I gave an interview to some site when I first came back to agenting, and I said something, and I still get people querying me on that. And I was like, oh yeah, I said that like 2-3 years ago, and now I've got that now. I don't really need it anymore, but I can't go back and take the interview down.
That makes sense. All right, perfect. Well, I think that's it. Thank you so much for joining us, Andrea.
Oh, thank you. I love the questions. It always keeps me on my toes.
Yeah, people asked a bunch of great questions. Lots of.
Yeah, they really did. It's a really great, and this is such a great conference, this Right On Con. So thanks for doing it for everybody.
Oh, no problem. And thank you to everyone listening for watching, and make sure to join us back for the conference February 8th through the 10th.
Yeah, that'll be great.
All right, I will sign us off now. Thanks so much, Andrea.
Bye.
Bye.